Education is preparation for reparations.
Really pleased to be with you this African Emancipation Day, because I think it's so important that we come together and we gather, and as you've heard, continue to educate ourselves and move together as a unit as we in the fight for reparations. And I think it's very important that we discuss reparations at every single level. And I say this because I chair the all-party parliamentary group on reparations in Parliament. Part of the reason why this is so important to me is it continues the work of the late great Bernie Grant, the first person who called for an apology for slavery and reparations in Parliament. Just a few months ago, I called for the same thing from our current Prime Minister, and he gave me a flat no. He told me that we shouldn't be unpicking our history, whatever that is supposed to mean. And I think that's a huge problem, but at the same time, it shows that, you know, the reparations movement is moving forward. Anytime a movement moves forward, you see a massive backlash. And a lot of the backlash I receive when I talk about reparations for people of African descent includes things like, why should we pay these people any more money because we've paid them enough in aid? Now, we all understand that what aid has been, and that is a form of neo-colonialism, and that the very simple fact is very much so that it has become an industry. And because it has become an industry, there is supply and demand, which means they benefit from keeping people poor and keeping that money running through that system. So we need to decolonize our overseas development aid. We also need to stop this situation where we have a lot of divisiveness and disunity within our community. Let us think about the fact that every single time, every single struggle that we have had for justice, we have always been held back by divisions in our community. Whether we have eventually won or not, what has always delayed us is divisions in our community. Now, I understand peoples of African descent, we are not all going to be one homogenous group who believe exactly the same thing, and that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, we need to be clear on what our demands are when we call for reparations. Yes, reparations will involve some form of money, but it's got to involve complete system change. We cannot be content with people handing us essentially scraps off their table when you look at what they're sending and say that we are okay, and let people bypass us, the community people. And I think the community is so important. I want you to all know that it was the community that came to me to set up the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations. The Stop the Mangamizi campaign, they came to me to do it. And it's important to me that the grassroots campaigns stay centrally involved, because if they are not centrally involved, then what on earth am I doing it for? What on earth are we calling for in Parliament? And you know, I speak to the fact that some people ask about whether or not politicians should be involved, and there's absolutely a place for both. Grassroots work is key, absolutely, but we need policy. We need the policy that brings about said reparations. There's not going to be that system change unless we completely dismantle the institutional racism that we see in our policy, in our parliament, in all of that legislation. It has to happen, and it can happen. It can happen. People thought there was a time that the end of slavery would never come, and it did. But we have to remember that as it came, those shackles were replaced with other shackles. They were replaced with colonialism, and through that colonialism, they continued to steal land and resources. And when colonialism ended, there was neo-colonialism, as I already said, through aid and the institutional racism that we continue to face in this country today and how it affects us. So when we call for reparations, we have to call for complete repair. Complete repair. That will be educational reparations, environmental reparations, justice reparations, and every single thing in between. Because if somebody just says some warm words and hands you a little bit of money, before you know, said money will end up going back to the same people that oppressed you in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. So whether or not we agree on every little issue, I call on all of you to understand that we are asking for the liberations of all peoples of African descent wherever they find themselves in the world, and that means complete system change, that means complete repair in the form of reparations, and that means that whether we may disagree on certain things, we must agree on that very, very basic fact. And I call on you to continue your involvement in those grassroots campaigns. When we get to a point where people like myself or people in positions of power are no longer listening to people like yourselves, that we are doing something wrong. So it's important you continue to make those loud noises. It's important that you continue to grow that movement, because what I've noticed is that as reparations is being talked about more and more in the media, and there are more and more things that you hear about it, it feels in some ways that it's being hijacked. The whole campaign is being hijacked in a certain way where voices of the grassroots individuals are not being heard, and that has to end. That has to stop. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to that complete repair, if it's not about the repair of people in the grassroots, then no repair has taken place. And we need to stop this system of rewarding some black African people of African descent elites and then leaving everybody else and say that the work has been done. That is not good enough. Until we have that equality, that equity, and that repair, the work is not done. So I call on all of you to continue in that fight this Emancipation Day, and remember that if we do not get that total repair, then we have done a complete disservice to those that came before us and those that are coming after us. Thank you very much.
Big words from Ribeiro-Addy, who's, as she said, is chairing the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations. Now, some people might not know what that is. Is anyone familiar with the APPGAR or the All-Party? Raise your hands if you've heard that before. Okay, so while we're here, let's do that educational work. What is the All-Party Parliamentary Group on African Reparations? And in practice, what does it mean? What does it have to offer us? Why is it worth our time? If it is.
It's absolutely worth your time. It is a cross-party group of members of Parliament, convened by members of Parliament, but with a secretariat that is based in the community, Stop the Mangamizi, that works on looking at the complete reparations for peoples of African descent wherever they find themselves in the world. So that's looking at all of the policy, that's looking at all of the different mechanisms that people have for reparations, and that's putting forward an agenda for the British government to follow. As a group that operates in Parliament, we have a special status to be able to push these particular issues in Parliament. I think that's very important if we are going to get the types of policies that we need to drive the reparations movement forward.
All right, and one last question, because there's other groups that are on the Secretariat. I believe it's AFFORD, the Global African Reparations Forum of London as well, and the Stop the Mangamizi We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign. So the truth is, we know that we don't yet have a space where we're all coming around the table. We don't, let's be honest. As a community, we don't have a space where we're all coming around the table. We have many different formations. But we have many different formations who are all doing the work. So one of the challenges to make sure that our power is manifested in places like that means that we have to organize ourselves in such a way that the types of African reparations in link with the continent, who represent the 1.4 billion people power strong elsewhere who are doing the work, can have their voices heard, and we can start to build those dialogues.
We have to look at colonialism, we have to look at capitalism. The system we're living in is a genocidal system and an ecocidal system.